Hello everyone, this is the Undying Nephilim, and in this video I will be showing several new things. As I've been saying in the last few videos, I'm going to show you the Mercenaries, since I finished all of the Mercenaries in the game. There's a sneak peek of them all. In addition to Mercenaries, I will also be talking about minor factions, which I don't think I've gone in any detail about yet. I think I showed a video with Lon Lon Ranch like a year or two ago. I don't think I went into any detail about them though. And also there is another second minor faction that I've added to the game, and I'll talk about them in a little bit of detail too. So yeah, I think I'll start with the minor factions first, and then I will go on to the Mercenaries. So anyway, what is a minor faction? A minor faction is like any of the normal factions in the game, except, as their name implies, they're minor. They're smaller. They have a much smaller. They have a much smaller roster of units. They only have one or two buildings and several technologies, and you cannot play as them. So when you go into a skirmish or later the campaign, you can't like select Lon Lon Ranch as an example. You can't select them and play as them. Rather, minor factions are kind of preset on some maps, and when we add in random maps into the game, there will be an option you can select that will spawn a randomized minor faction on the map. So, what function do minor factions serve? They do several different things. At the outset, they're kind of an obstacle. So if you don't plan on interacting with them, they're just kind of like an enemy that you can destroy that kind of blocks the way. Unlike the normal factions, they won't like build up a huge base and a huge army and go out and attack. They'll just kind of focus on their tiny little base. They'll make a small army to defend it, and they won't really do much other than that. They'll replace units and buildings that get destroyed, but they won't do anything crazy. But the main purpose of a minor faction is to get their stuff and use it. And there will be several different ways that you can do that. Currently, there's only one way you can acquire a minor faction in the game, but down the road there will be two other ways you can do it. So the first way you can get a minor faction is just to conquer them. So you build up a little army, you send your army to attack their base, and then you'll capture their base, and when you capture the base you can train all of their units as well as their hero. This is probably the easiest way to gain access to a minor faction, although you have to build up an army first, so there's kind of a resource investment. Different factions will be better at conquering minor factions as opposed to using the other two methods of getting them. Like Labrina is a perfect example. Labrina will be able to just curb stomp minor factions and conquer them really easily and subjugate them, because that's kind of what they do. They're known for enslaving their kind of neighbor states and using them to fuel their army. So Labrina can just come in and easily conquer Lon Lon Ranch as an example, and then they can turn Lon Lon Ranch's units against their enemy. The other two methods of capturing a minor faction is if you have played Rise of Legends or Age of Empires 3, in that game there was also in both of those games there's minor factions, and you could capture them by sending a merchant to start trading with them. So you'll go to your marketplace, you'll create your merchant, and then you'll have your merchant start trading with the minor faction in question, and he'll go back and forth. And each time he successfully trades with them, a little meter will go up, and then when it gets all the way up, you'll basically buy them out. All of their armies and their buildings will change to your side, and you'll gain access to them and their units and their heroes and technologies and whatnot. So that's kind of like the economic way to capture a minor faction, and economic factions will obviously have the advantage of doing that. Like Lanayru province will probably have some kind of bonus to gaining minor factions by trading with them and buying them out that way. And then the third way you'll be able to capture a minor faction is it's still kind of, what's the way I would describe it? It's not exactly kind of solidified, but I kind of call it like the diplomatic way. And I think how it will work is you'll have some kind of envoy that you can send to the minor faction, and they kind of like work out a sort of alliance. I'm not exactly sure how that will work yet, but it'll be some kind of peaceable way to acquire the minor faction. Several factions will obviously several factions I think will kind of lend towards that kind of way of acquiring minor factions, like the Wiz Robe, where they could train their bishops and priests and then send them out to convert everyone. So I'll call it the envoy or the diplomatic way of acquiring minor factions. But that's not in the engine yet. The economic way is not in the engine yet right now. In all the previous versions and the next version that is about to come out, the only way you can get a minor faction is to conquer them the old-fashioned way. So it'll be like that for the foreseeable future. But anyway, the first minor faction, which is Lon Lon Ranch, has actually been in the game for a while. I added several more things to them to kind of round them out. So if you've played this game already, you're probably already familiar with Lon Lon Ranch. But there is a second minor faction that has also been added in. They will show up in the next version. And I will talk about them after I get through Lon Lon Ranch. So, Lon Lon Ranch. They appear on the Hyrule Field map. And when randomized maps are added into the engine, there's just a chance that they'll spawn on the random map. But anyway, their units, first up is the Rancher, which is just a normal worker unit. All of the minor factions have kind of like a normal worker unit. Some of them are better than normal workers, but Lon Lon Ranch just has a normal worker. Statistically, it is exactly the same as the Kingdom of Hyrule's worker. So for most factions, you probably won't train these. You'll just use the ones that you get at the start after you capture them. Although if you're playing as a faction with workers that have low carrying capacity, like the Kokiri and later the Deku Scrubs, you'll probably want to train these workers instead because they can carry more. So otherwise, it's just a normal worker. There's nothing particularly special about them at all. Anyway, the first not worker unit that Lon Lon Ranch can train is the Ranch Hand, which is kind of like a worker. It can actually build buildings, it can harvest resources, but he's got a weapon and he can attack. I don't think he has an anti-cavalry bonus despite the fact he's got like a pitchfork. I think he actually has a creature bonus. Yeah, he deals a little bit of bonus damage to creatures, so he'll be good at fighting off wild animals or enemy creature units. But otherwise, he's also kind of not a very, I guess he's not a very exciting unit. He's just a worker with an attack and a bonus against creatures. So, he's pretty cheap though. So if you're playing as a faction that's if you're kind of struggling with resources, I think he only costs, 35 food. That's not that much. So, a very cheap unit. Otherwise unremarkable. The third unit that Lon Lon Ranch can train is the Ranch Watch, which is a little bit more useful than the first two units. She is a ranged archer unit that I'm certain has a damage bonus against creatures. Yeah, she's good at hunting creatures basically. So if you're playing on a map like Hyrule Field that has lots of creatures that you can hunt for food, you'll want to train quite a few of these because they're really good at killing creatures and then harvesting the meat from them. So factions that are very not very good at accumulating food like the Moblins and Gerudo, these units will be really useful to hunt wild animals on certain maps. So yeah, that is the Ranch Watch. I don't think she has any other bonuses though, just let's see her gathering rate. Yeah, she's good at gathering meat, better than like the normal workers, and she does a damage bonus against creatures. So that's it. So yeah, that's the Ranch Watch, a slightly above average archer unit. Next up is the Ranch Rider, which is a melee cavalry unit, and this unit has a spear, so it is an anti-cavalry cavalry unit. This unit is good at fighting other cavalry, and it's an incredibly fast cavalry unit. So actually, I think Lon Lon Ranch's cavalry is even better than Ordana Province's. So these two horse units, I think, are the best cavalry in the game. They're even better than Ordana's Rough Riders, if I remember correctly. Although, unlike the Rough Riders, this one's an anti-cavalry unit, so it's not quite as good against infantry. It's better against other cavalry. So if you're playing as a faction that lacks cavalry, like the Dark Nuts, this will be a unit you'll definitely want to train if you manage to capture Lon Lon Ranch. They'll really help factions like the Dark Nuts, or what other factions have? Labrna doesn't have that many cavalry units, so these will be useful for factions like that. So very, very fast melee anti-cavalry units. Very low armor though. Yeah, only 7 armor for all armor types. So yeah, these units will die really fast if they get into a prolonged melee against anything other than cavalry. So yeah, Ordana still has an advantage at ripping apart infantry with their cavalry. Anyway, the next unit is the Cowgirl, which is a ranged cavalry unit. And I checked right before I started this video, but ranged cavalry is actually really, really rare in this game. The only other faction right now that has a ranged cavalry unit is the Gerudo, which their upgraded scout unit becomes a ranged cavalry unit. There are several units in the game where you can garrison archers in them, and they kind of transform into a sort of ranged cavalry unit, like the Kokiri Stag Chariot or the Goron Salamander Wagon, but just a straight up ranged cavalry unit are really rare in the game, and I think that's by design because units that can kite are incredibly annoying, and this unit is able to kite if you're able to micromanage them. So they're not super long range though, but a big group of these, you can kind of circle them around infantry and just slowly pick at them and then run away, and then pick at them and run away. So these will probably be pretty annoying. They'll probably have to be nerfed after a little while, but they have really low armor. They only have 5 armor, so their armor is even worse than this guy here. So if they get stuck in a melee, they'll probably die in like 4 or 5 hits. You definitely want to micromanage these and keep them out of range. Other than that, they don't have any other bonuses though. Yeah, they don't have a hunting bonus like their dismounted archer, so they're purely a harassing kiting unit. So yeah, that's the Cowgirl. The last unit that Lon Lon Ranch can produce is the Cow Cart, which is this cart full of milk pulled along by a cow. Obviously, it's a non-combat unit. It can't attack. Its special ability is that it heals units around it using the Lon Lon milk that it's carrying naturally. So factions that have no ability to heal, which is a lot, only a few factions have the ability to heal. So most factions, this will be a really useful unit to get. I'm already picturing this being really invaluable to like the Dark Nuts, who have 0 healing at all. Like you can't even garrison Dark Nut units inside a building to heal them. They have no healing at all because they're like so powerful. So yeah, Lon Lon Ranch is if you're playing as the Dark Nuts, you definitely want to get this minor faction on your side because they have good cavalry, which the Dark Nuts are lacking, and they have this healing unit, which the Dark Nuts are also lacking. So yeah, that's the Cow Cart. Nothing else other than that. It's just a straight up support unit that heals units. Let's see what its armor is like. It actually has better armor than their 2 cavalry units, so it's a little more resistant than them. But yeah, that is the Cow Cart. And those are the units you can train if you manage to capture Lon Lon Ranch or secure an alliance with them, however that works down the road. But their hero unit is, of course, Mallon, who's probably one of the most famous characters from the entire series. And, of course, she's riding on Epona. And like the Cowgirls, she is a ranged cavalry unit. So she's got a bow and arrow. She can attack from a distance. If you micromanage her, you can kite enemy units. I have a feeling she's going to be very annoying if you're fighting against her because she's so fast and can kite. Statistically, though, her stats are pretty low, though. She has very low armor, although her armor is better than the Cowgirl's armor. And she only does 35 pierce damage, so she's not very strong. She's just kind of like a ranged harassing unit, so I don't think she'll end up being too powerful, just kind of an annoyance. She'll be really good at picking off workers, though. Same thing with the Cowgirl. I can see them being used to like sneak up behind an enemy base and just slowly pick off their workers and then run away. So that'll be pretty useful for that. But I guess just to clarify, the heroes that minor factions have, they are kind of like the normal heroes that you can train, except they're not quite as strong. When abilities are added into the engine, they won't have as many abilities as a normal hero. So statistically, they're weaker. They don't have as many abilities, but they don't take up your hero slot. So when you train your other hero that you pick for your main faction, you can also train any heroes that of the minor factions that you've captured, and they won't take up that slot. So you can have more than one hero out at a time. Because I figured since they're weaker, they won't be too overpowered having more than one of them running around. But so if you're playing as the Kingdom of Hyrule and you select Link, you will be able to deploy Link and also summon Mallon at the same time. You won't be locked out of either one, depending on which one you train first. So that's cool. So yeah, that is Lon Lon Ranch. At least that is the units that they can train, and that is their hero. They also have 3 technologies that you can research if you acquire them. Obviously, they can research Lon Lon Milk, which gives all of your worker units health regeneration, which is extremely useful, especially if your workers are getting harassed and they take some damage and they manage to survive. That'll give them health regeneration, so that's useful. And they have a Lon Lon Cow tech, which allows your marketplaces to spawn cows. That's really, really useful for factions that are terrible at generating food, like the Gerudo and Moblins. So if you capture Lon Lon Ranch as the Gerudo or Moblins, and you research this technology, your markets will spawn cows, which your workers can then kill and gather food from. So really, really good source of food. And then the third technology is just called Mallon's Horse Training, which boosts both the speed and health of all of your cavalry units. So that'll make all of your cavalry stronger just across the board, and faster too, which definitely I can see being useful for like the Dark Nuts, because their Rebinacks are pretty slow for a cavalry unit, so that'll give them the ability to kind of keep pace with some of the faster cavalry in the game. So yeah, that is Lon Lon Ranch. Kind of a cool little minor faction. Probably one of the coolest heroes in the game. Pretty sure a lot of people agree with that statement. But anyway, that is the first minor faction that has been in previous versions and will be in the next version on the Hyrule field map. The next minor faction that I'm adding into the game are the Zuna, and I will also be making a map that has them on it. The Zuna, I believe, have only appeared in 4 Sword Adventures, and in Nintendo canon, they are known for creating Ganon's Trident. In Nephi canon, it's the same case. They manufactured Ganon's giant trident, and in Nephi canon, they're just kind of known as weapon crafters. They're basically black arms, or like a black market weapon salesmen. They create a bunch of weaponry and they sell it to other mercenaries and other factions, and yeah, All of the Dark Nut weapons and armor was designed by these guys and sold to them at some point in the past. And yeah, they're just, they're pretty wealthy because of it, as evidenced by all the gold-plated stuff that they have. They've made quite a lot of money from all the weapons they've created. But anyway, these Zuna, they got quite a few units that you can train when you capture them. And first up is just the normal worker, which is called the Zouna Craftsman. Like the Lon Lon Ranch worker, there's nothing particularly special about this one. I believe statistically they're exactly the same as the Gerudo workers. So if you're playing as the Kokiri or any other faction that has workers with a low carrying capacity, you might want to start training these workers instead if you capture this minor faction, because they're better than Kokiri workers. Otherwise, they're not particularly interesting. You'll just be using them to build the Zuna buildings if you want to build one. But other than that, there's the normal worker. So yeah, that is the Zouna Craftsman. Next up is the Zouna Merchantman, which is this guy with this fantabulous hat and his little partner pushing around this cart full of supplies. It's kind of basically the same as the Dark Nut unit that's spawned by their supply depot. It's basically a mobile drop-off site, so you can move this unit around to different resources and your workers can drop off the resources at it. So if you're playing almost any faction, if you capture the Zuna, you won't need to build any drop sites. You can just train 2 or 3 of these and have them move around with your workers instead of building a bunch of drop sites at all the resources across the map. But not only that, but this also doubles as a merchant unit. So you can send it to allied marketplaces and they'll generate tons of resources. In fact, they are better than any other merchant in the game. So even if you don't plan on using them as drop sites, they can still generate lots of resources for you if you have an ally. So yeah, that is the Zouna Merchantman. They can't attack, so it's not really a combat unit or even a support unit by any means. It's a resource kind of unit. That's about it. Next up is the Zuna Trident, which is just kind of on the surface, it's kind of just like a normal infantry unit. Even though it kind of has a polearm, I don't think it has an anti-cavalry bonus, if I remember right. Yeah, it has a damage bonus against small creatures, because it's actually kind of what tridents are intended for. They're kind of intended to stab down at things, which is why they're forked. If you just want to stab at, something your size or larger, you just use a normal spear, not a trident. Tridents are meant to like stab down at things, which I don't know if it was intentional on Nintendo's part, but that actually makes the trident like the perfect weapon for Ganon, because he's so big compared to most of his enemies that he probably would just be stabbing down at them. Just a fun little tidbit there. But so yeah, the Trident tier has a damage bonus against small targets, so they're good at killing Kokiri and later Deku Scrubs. But otherwise, it's just a normal infantry unit. Nothing too special about it. So yeah, the Zuna Trident tier. Next up is this unit's a little bit more interesting. It is the Tribe Omen. And this guy is carrying around a crossbow, which basically fires 3 bolts instead of 1. Like most crossbowman units in the game, they deal true damage, so no matter how good the armor of its target is, it'll always do the same amount of damage to it. And because it's firing 3 bolts at once, it will do splash damage to any units that are near its target. So if you got, a big slow Dark Nut slowly coming up to this guy, and there's 2 other big slow Dark Nuts following him, he'll be able to damage all 3 of them with his attack. And he'll be completely negating their armor too. He'll be doing consistent damage to them despite the fact that they're decked out in awesome armor. So he's basically the Hylian crossbowman, but times 3. So really, really useful, especially for factions that lack ranged units, like the Dark Nuts. If you're playing as the Dark Nuts, you'll definitely want these guys. Or even if you're fighting against the Dark Nuts, these guys are really useful because they ignore armor. And the Dark Nuts have a lot of good armor units, so that is the Tribe Omen. Next up is the Tribalista, and if you haven't picked up on it yet, the Zuna have a theme of tri. They have the Tridents and the Tri-Crossbowmen, and now the Tribalista, which, like their crossbowmen, is basically just a giant ballista that can be loaded up with 3 bolts and fires all 3 bolts at the same time. Like the crossbowmen, it deals splash damage, so it's basically a siege unit that deals splash damage. So if there's like a gate up here and he's attacking the gate, he'll do damage to the gate and anything near the gate or right next to it. So it's basically just a ballista that deals splash damage, which none of the ballistas in the game deal splash damage, so that kind of sets it apart from the rest. But yeah, that is the Tribalista. Pretty cool siege unit, I think, anyway. Obviously, if you're playing as a faction that doesn't have good siege weapons, you'll want quite a few of these. Although you'll probably want their next unit more, which is this wonderful, wacky looking thing here. This is the Zuna Siege Tower, which is actually based on a battering ram that several different Sumerian civilizations used, in particular the Assyrians. I always thought these things looked incredibly wacky, but they apparently work. What sets this thing apart from normal battering rams, despite other than the fact that it's huge, is that it deals damage bonuses specifically against castles and fortresses. So this thing is a castle killer. You can still use it to attack walls and gates and towers and other buildings, but it has a dedicated damage bonus against castles and forts. So that makes them pretty useful against those buildings, which are generally really hard to destroy because castles and forts are very strong and powerful, even against other siege units. But these things, if you bring them up, they'll just start tearing their castle apart and they will barely be taking damage from it. But not only that, but you can garrison units inside of them as well. So I'll go ahead and garrison all of these crossbowmen inside. So as you can see, the little Zouna crossbowmen are hanging out inside the siege ram tower thingy, and they can shoot their their triple crossbows out of the little gaps in the windows. So that's pretty cool. So yeah, the Zunaean siege tower, probably one of the coolest but weirdest looking siege units in the game. I love this thing. It's just so ridiculous. I love how big it is too. So that is it for the Zuna units, but yeah, they also have their hero, who is a Master Vorde, the Vizier of Zunaeus. He's essentially the leader of the Zuna people. There are no canonical Zuna characters in the Zelda series, so he is created specifically for Hyrule Conquest. He's appeared in several of the cinematics. He's kind of like the lackey of Zalanbar, who is the Darknet deity. He kind of sucks up to him, and he basically worships him, although probably for reasons that aren't entirely genuine. He's just kind of afraid of his power, and he sells a bunch of weapons and stuff to the Darknet. So he kind of just I don't know. He's kind of the Darknet lackey, but obviously, if you give him enough money or you conquer him, he'll serve whatever faction gives him money or threatens to kill him, I guess. But he's not a very strong combat hero. He's got the same bonuses as the Trident tier, so he's got a damage bonus against small creatures, but he's probably going to be a support hero where he has some kind of like economic abilities after we add hero abilities into the engine. He'll probably have some kind of economic ability, like boosting, weapons research, or maybe the rate that workers gather. Haven't really decided yet, since we're not adding hero abilities in the near future. So I haven't really put too much effort into thinking of the minor faction abilities for their heroes. But yeah, that is Master Vorde, the hero of the Zuna. And they'll also have 3 techs, which I forgot to add here, but I'll go ahead and add that really quickly before I pack this up for the patrons. I do have a list of them here, though, so I can still talk about them. The first one is just called Zouna Craftsmanship, which just gives a flat damage bonus across the board to all of your units except for mages. So any unit that deals hack, pierce, or crush damage will just get a solid increase to their damage. So that's pretty useful. It's a pretty wide-reaching technology, which was useful for any faction basically, except maybe the Wiz Robe, because the Wiz Robe have a lot of magic units. Same thing with the Fairies of Tarm, but most of the factions in the game will benefit from that technology immensely. Their second tech is called the Zunaeus tax, which allows all of your marketplaces to start generating rupees automatically. So that's really useful, especially if you're running low on rupees. And then they also have another tech that I might replace, which basically boosts the amount of resources that merchants can carry, including their own merchant. So that'll be useful if you're playing a multiplayer game and you have an ally and resources are running dry, and you guys can just start trading with your merchants, and then you research that technology and you'll be gaining double resources from your merchant. So that's I can see that being a useful late game technology in a multiplayer match, but probably not so much in single player, so I might replace that tech. But yeah, that is the Zuna and their wonderful little horribly misplaced patch of desert in this lush alpine forest. But yeah, that's the Zuna. They're going to be added into the next version of the game, and they're going to appear on one of the maps that I'm making. So yeah, hopefully they look cool. I think I like Lon Lon Ranch a little bit more, but I definitely like the aesthetics of these guys more than Lon Lon Ranch. I like their little houses with the flowers coming out, and then their blingin' tridents and everything, and the gold plating on their stuff. I like that. Kind of a sucker for, I guess, gold-plated things. So yeah, that's the Zuna. And now we'll be coming to the thing that I have been talking about on and off in some of the other videos, is Mercenaries. So Mercenaries, what are Mercenaries? Mercenaries are tied to cultures, so I guess I should talk briefly about cultures. So what is culture? If you get rid of all the fluff and all the extra visuals and stuff, a culture is basically just shared units and technologies between multiple factions. So mercenaries are essentially units that multiple factions can train that are not unique to a specific faction. So factions with the civilized culture, for example, like the Hylians and the Zora. Who else? Trying to think of Labrna, civilized factions. They'll all be able to train in these 3 units. They're not unique to a specific faction, and each culture will have technologies that is shared between multiple factions too. So there are 7 cultures in the game. Let me see if I can remember them off the top of my head. There's civilized. There is barbaric. There is naturalistic. There is shadow. There is ancient, there is Twilight, and what's the last one? There's one more. Oh yeah, the hive culture, which actually isn't called hive, but anyway. So yeah, I guess I'll briefly describe those cultures, and then I'll start talking about the mercenaries. So yeah, as the name implies, the civilized culture is factions that are civilized. They have really relatively stable civilizations. They have good education. They generally have good technology. Examples would be the Kingdom of Hyrule, the Zoras, Labrna, What other ones? I think those are the main 3 civilized ones that aren't from the expansions. So, yeah, that's the civilized culture. And then the barbaric culture, which get these 3 units here, are, they're, as the name implies, they're not civilized. They kind of have unstable civilizations. They generally only function because they have a strong leader or a common enemy that kind of unites them. Examples of barbaric factions would be like the Moblins, which is a really great example. The Moblins, the Gorons, the River Zora, the Gerudo are also classified as barbaric. They're basically civilizations that are highly unstable. They generally don't have a uniting kind of set of ethics like a civilized civilization. They're usually warlike. That's not always the case. Like the Gorons aren't particularly violent or warlike, but that's kind of a trait that most barbaric factions have, is their culture is very geared around fighting other people. But anyway, the next culture is naturalistic, which will get these 3 units. And as the name implies, naturalistic factions are, they're like elves. They're hippies. They get along with nature. Their cities generally blend with nature instead of destroy nature. Like the Kokiri obviously are the perfect example. They live in trees. They don't chop. It's kind of funny because the Kokiri actually do chop trees down, but they generally don't do significant damage to their environment, and they generally have a lot of wild animals and creatures in their armies. So the Kokiri are a great example. Ordana Province actually is one. The Deku Scrubs are one. The Fairies of Tarm are a naturalistic faction. And then the next culture is Shadow, which the TLDR is they're evil. I mean, that's kind of an oversimplification. Shadow factions are basically civilizations that screw around with stuff they probably shouldn't be, like demonic kind of stuff, undead sort of stuff. The Sheikah are a great example. The Sheikah aren't exactly evil, but they mess with a bunch of really dark stuff that they shouldn't be messing with. The Stalfos are a shadow faction. Icona is a shadow faction. So yeah, that kind of is an overview of shadow factions. And then the next culture is Ancient, which we'll get these units here. Ancient factions are, well, they're ancient. They've been around an extremely long time, and they're usually in a state of decay. Like, they're well past their prime. Like, the Dark Nuts. The Oka are an example of an ancient faction. They usually had like some kind of great magic or technology, but it's kind of like faded away. They're basically a really powerful civilization that has been around for thousands of years, and they're no longer in their prime, and they've kind of like decayed. So yeah, I think I said Dark Nuts were an example. The Oka are a great example. Akala will be an ancient faction, and I think that's about it, besides some of the expansion factions. And then there's 2 more cultures. However, one of them, which is, I guess it's called the Hive culture, but Hive is actually not an accurate name because Hive just means busy. So their kind of placeholder name is Holistic because I think that's a more appropriate name. So Hive or Holistic factions are like ants. They don't really have individuals. I think the best example is obviously the Goma. They're kind of like a super organism. Other factions that will be like that are like the Guardians. What other ones? Malice will be a Hive faction. The Perella will be a Hive. There's several more that I can't think of off the top of my head, but Hive factions don't have individuals. They're like a giant collective super organism. And they also don't have any mercenaries, but they'll have other bonuses that kind of make up for the fact that they don't have any mercenary units, which is why there's no Hive units out here with the other ones. And then the last culture is Twilight, which also doesn't have units. They will have mercenary units, but the Twilight factions are so far off in the future because they're relegated to an expansion pack that I didn't feel the need to make their mercenaries for the next version. So we won't be seeing the Twilight culture or their mercenaries probably for several years from whenever this video gets posted. But the Twilight factions will have a shared set of mercenaries. They'll have shared technologies. They'll be able to terraform Hyrule and slowly turn it into the realm of Twilight, which is really cool. I will go into more detail about that culture when I get to the Twilight factions. But anyway, let's talk about these mercenary units. So, for the Civilized Factions, they get the Guru Maisman, which are these little lizard guys. A lot of these creatures are pretty obscure, so if I get the game wrong that they're from, you can go ahead and yell at me in the comments. I'm pretty sure the Guru are from Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. Yeah, they're these little lizard creatures. They've got a mace and they've got a shield, so they're resistant to arrows, which makes them really good at fighting against archer factions, and they deal crush damage with their mace, so they're good against armored units too, and to a lesser extent attacking buildings. But yeah, one other thing I forgot to mention about mercenaries. One thing that's useful about mercenaries is that their only cost is rupees. Which early in the game you won't be using that many rupees, so rupees are mostly used to research technologies. So if you're early in the game and you're running low on food and other resources that you usually use to make units, you can instead use rupees to train mercenaries. So that's kind of one of the advantages of mercenaries, is that they only cost rupees, which is useful in the early game. But anyway, that is the Guru Maisman. Next up is the Tin Suit, which is technically based on the Armos from the first Zelda game, but in the Zelda cartoon, for whatever reason, they called them Tin Suits. And since the Armos and Nephi Cannon are the hopping statues, I decided to go with the cartoon name, which is the Tin Suit. And they're these really tall humanoids. They probably had some civilization in the past that fell apart. Now they're just a roving band of mercenaries that civilized factions can hire. And they're very slow, but they have a very, very, very long reach. It's technically not a pike, but they're almost like a pikeman, so they're very good against cavalry. And they have a huge range because they have such a long reach that they can deal damage to cavalry and units behind their target. So they kind of deal splash damage, which is very rare for a spearman unit. And the Guru decided to run off and attack this bear. Get out of there, Guru. Leave the bear alone. And it looks like this bear has no animations, but that is one of the 0 AD bears, so I'm not sure what's going on there. But anyway, I'll let him kill the bear. The haunted bear with no animations. Anyway, get back here, guys. Okay, so where was I? I think I talked about all there was with the Tin Suit. It's just a pretty strong, slow, but long-reaching anti-cavalry unit that deals splash damage. And then next up is the Wushu Knights, which might be one of my favorite mercenaries, other than this lovely guy down here. So my second favorite mercenary. Statistically, this guy is basically just a Dark Knight. But civilized factions can hire them, so the Hylians will be able to hire them. The Zora can. They'll give those factions a lot of muscle and armor. These guys are heavily armored. They deal knockback damage, so they'll send units flying. And they're just cool looking too. And they're classified as a knight, so if you're playing as Link, his abilities and technologies will boost these guys, which is pretty cool. So yeah, that is the Wushu Knight. If I remember right, the Wusus also appeared in the second Zelda game, and I think that's the only game that they were in. So yeah, one of my favorite mercenaries. All right. Next up are the Barbarian Mercenaries, and the first one is the Goriia, which is this crazy little Santa Claus badger that has a boomerang. I believe the Goriias showed up in the original Zelda game. I know they've been in tons of games after. I remember them from the Oracle games, but I'm pretty sure they were in the original Zelda game. Again, if I'm wrong, go ahead and yell at me in the comments. I don't know. But yeah, they are the first mercenary units that barbarians can hire, and they just throw a boomerang that stuns units, and they deal a little bit of splash damage. So that's kind of useful. So yeah, that's the Goriia. And then the next unit that barbarians can hire are the Tariffs, which first appeared in A Link to the Past. They were those little bowl things with the little spear tridents, and they charge at you. And that's basically what they do in Hyrule Conquest. They're very fast, and they're large, and they're spearman units, so they got an anti-cavalry bonus, but they also deal knockback, so they're pretty good at crowd control. They're very good against cavalry, obviously. Unless you're fighting really heavy cavalry, they'll just be knocking the light cavalry out of the way. They won't be able to do much against them, so yeah, that's the Tariffs. Probably the most useful of the three mercenaries that the barbarians can hire. But the third unit that barbarians can hire is the Deira Marauder, which I believe also first and only appeared in the second Zelda game. There's nothing too special about this guy. He's just a straight up beefy unit with decent armor and a lot of hit points. I think I entertained the idea that they would be aquatic and can go in water. That's not canonical, so I don't know if that'll end up being the case, but these units might end up being aquatic in the future. I haven't decided yet, but otherwise they're just a straight up beefy combat unit. Nothing very particularly special about them. Although I think they look really cool. I always thought the Deiras were one of the cooler designs for some of the old school creatures from the Zelda games. Anyway, the Naturalistic Mercenaries. First up is the Forest Thief, which they've been in several Zelda games, but I believe they first showed up in A Link to the Past, and that is the design that this one is based on. When stealth is added into the engine, they will be stealthed, so they'll be invisible until they attack. And they throw knives, so they're kind of like a light, stealthy, ranged unit. I believe they deal true damage, so they're really good against armored units. But other than that, they're just kind of like a sneaky ranged stealth unit. In Nephi lore, they are basically Kokiri that completely left the influence of the Great Deku Tree, and they ended up actually growing up into kind of normal Hylians. Although I kind of gave them sort of monkeyish features because they kind of, I don't know, they've kind of devolved into the forest, I guess. But anyway, that is the Forest Thief. The second unit is the Piku, or Piku? I'm actually not sure how to pronounce it. I'm just going to call them Pikus, I guess. Piku, Piku, I don't know. They're the little fox things from A Link to the Past that would knock you around and steal your items. And in Hyrule Conquest, that's kind of what they do. They don't literally knock items around, but every time they attack an enemy, they'll slowly generate a little bit of resources. I might limit it to only rupees, but yeah, they gain resources from attacking enemy units. Slowly but surely, which is pretty handy. They're also pretty fast, although I feel like they're probably too fast, so I might slow them down a little bit. But yeah, they're a pretty cool unit, I think. And then the third unit that Naturalistic Factions can hire as a mercenary is the Mago, or Majo. I believe it's pronounced Mago, but who knows. They appeared in the second Zelda game, and they are mages that shoot fireballs. So if you're playing as a faction that doesn't have a lot of mages, like the Kokiri, these will be a very useful unit to hire. Although if you're playing as the fairies, you probably will go for these two units more, because the fairies already have tons and tons of mages and mage units. But I don't know. I like this crazy little witch. I don't think she deals splash damage. No, she doesn't deal any splash damage, so... But she shoots out little fireballs and deals fire damage. But anyway, that is the Mago. And that is it for their mercenaries. Now we're getting into some of the cooler mercenaries, the Shadow Mercenaries. First up is the Stell Children, which are these little... If you played Ocarina of Time, which I believe is where they first showed up in, they're like these little dog-headed abominations of nature, or unnatural nature, whatever. They're little zombie children, or skeleton undead children, basically. And their kind of advantage is they're extremely cheap. They only cost 10 rupees, I think. So even for a mercenary, they're really cheap. So you can just start summoning these things by the bucket load. They're kind of like the Goma larva, but the undead version of them. Or you can just swarm with them. I don't know. I think they're pretty cool. Originally, they were a Stalfos unit, but they have ties to Icona and the Sheikah, so I felt like it was better to make them just a shadow unit in general. So the Stalfos will be able to create them. Icona will. The Sheikah will. What other factions? There's a few more shadow factions that I can't think of. Oh yeah, Aghanim is a shadow faction. He'll be able to summon these guys. So yeah, really cheap cannon fodder. Next up is the Gibdo, which is essentially the Redead. However, if you are playing as the Stalfos, when these units die, they'll turn into a Redead. So if you're not playing as a Stalfos, they'll just be a Gibdo. They'll basically be the Redead unit with the mummy skin. But if you're playing as the Stalfos, in addition to Redeads, you'll be able to hire the Gibdo, which can turn into a normal Redead when they get killed. So it'll kind of have like a double life. These units are very, very slow, but whenever they attack enemies, they stun them, kind of like in the Zelda games. So mass of these engaging enemies in a melee will kind of stop them all in their tracks. The best way to deal with these guys is ranged attacks or just burn them with fire. I guess if you're playing as the Kokiri, hire lots of these witches to burn these things to the ground. So fire is really good against them. And then next up is my favorite mercenary, which I'm not sure if it will stay a mercenary. It might actually become an explicitly Stalfos unit, but for now and in the next version, it's a mercenary. It's the Dead Hand, which is one of the most horrifying things to ever show up in this series. It was in Ocarina of Time, and I don't think it's been in any other games. What this guy can do is he summons all of these little hand things, which you can actually move independently of him. Every time the hands die, I think it's after 10 seconds, he'll regenerate them for free, which is pretty awesome. So I'll go ahead and kill this hand right here. And then in about, oh, I guess it's less than 10 seconds. That was only like maybe 2 seconds. So yeah, he keeps spawning these hands, which you can move independently of him. And kind of like the Gibdo, there is a chance that the hands will stun their targets. However, if you kill the dead hand right here, all of the hands that he spawned will die with him. So I'll go ahead and kill him, and all the hands will go at the same time as him. Like that. So if you're fighting these guys, you'll want to focus all of your attention on him and not his little hands that he's spawning. Ugh, what a horrifying creature. Anyway, we're almost at the end here. And speaking of horrifying creatures, the first unit that ancient factions can hire is the Pole's Voice, which canonically is an abomination. They've got like this giant crazy mouth full of lamprey's teeth under them that they use to bite people, which is awesome. And they bounce. I'm not entirely sure what exactly I want their kind of gimmick to be. I'm thinking they'll just stun enemies that they attack. But for now, they're just kind of a cheap unit that's kind of... Oh, duh, that was their ability. They're actually, they're extremely resistant to non-magic attacks. That's actually, that's in Nintendo's canon too. You can only kill these things with, like ranged attacks or magic. You can kill them with melee attacks in this game. They're just very, very resistant to them. So if you want to fight off these guys and kill them, you'll need ranged units or mages to burn them to the ground. So yeah, Pole's voice. I can't believe I forgot what their ability thing was. I love the little hop and the sound effect it makes. Whoop, whoop. Anyway. Next up is the Gaiamos, or the living version of it. There is a statue version of the Gaiamos from, I believe it's A Link Between Worlds, and I believe the statues were also in A Link to the Past, but they didn't do anything in A Link to the Past. People who are more, I guess, into the lore will probably correct me, but yeah, in A Link Between Worlds, the statues would hop around and attack you. But in Hyrule Conquest, there's actually a living creature called a Gaiamos, which is this little flying imp thing with a trident. Because it's flying, it can go over any type of terrain, so it can go up the cliffs, which I'll go ahead and demonstrate here. So they can fly up mountains and inclines, and they can fly back down. They can go over rivers, so that's really useful. But the best thing about this creature is it can actually turn into stone by clicking this thing here. And it'll turn into a stone statue. Now, while it is a stone statue, it can't move, and it can't attack, and it can't do anything, but it gains a very, very high regeneration rate, so it'll rapidly regenerate its health when it's been damaged. And then obviously you can make them come to life again. However, it's not instantaneous. It'll take about 10 seconds for them to emerge from their stone form. So if you just turn them into stone in the middle of an enemy base, they're probably going to die. So you'll want to fly them away, hide them up on top of a mountain, and then turn them into stone up there while they regenerate their health. So yeah, that is the Gaiamos. I like how they turned out. Alright, and the last mercenary unit that the ancient factions can hire, and also the last unit I'm showing in this video, it actually doesn't have a name yet. The kind of name in progress I have for them, they're called Meteor Magicians. That name is just a placeholder. If people like that name, I'll stick with it. But they are the Wiz Robes from Breath of the Wild. Those little crazy guys that like danced across the sky and whatnot. Specifically the ones that shoot out the giant fireballs. So what is unique about this unit is, one, kind of like the Gaiamos, it hovers, so it can go up cliffs and fly over rivers and basically pass over any kind of terrain. Actually, looks like I forgot to add it, so he can't go up that cliff now. Anyway, but they're actually a siege unit, because they shoot out like these giant fireballs that they're not explicitly fireballs, they're kind of like molten rocks. So they're really good against buildings. So it's kind of like a siege mage unit, which I thought was kind of a cool little idea. They do deal splash damage. So if they attack units, they can deal, fire damage to groups of units, which is really handy. But yeah, that is the Meteor Magician. And that is it for the mercenaries. Let me see if there's anything else I forgot. I think that's it, though. Yeah, that's it. So hopefully these mercenaries are looking cool. They will be in the next version of the game, which hopefully should be out next week. If you are a patron, I'll have a build with the Mercenaries in it, probably up sometime tomorrow. If I can get it up tonight when I upload this video, I'll get it up tonight, but it takes a long time to pack it up and upload it, so it probably won't be up till the day after this video goes up. But you'll be able to try out all of these Mercenaries and see if they, you know, make the game any funner. I personally think they do. But yeah, anyway, hopefully you guys like this video. Stay tuned for the next version of the game, which, as I just said, should be out in about a week. I'll make an animated trailer for that, and it will feature the Moblins, the Dark Nuts, the Mercenary units. It'll have the Zuna minor faction added in, and there will be several new maps, and I believe 2 of them will be 1v1 maps, which a lot of people have asked for. So yeah, hopefully you guys like that, and hopefully you guys all have a good one.